Hello, my name is Gaia, and I am 32 years old. I work as a cardiologist at a private clinic, a small but prestigious one, the kind where they know every patient by name and where, over a cup of coffee in the doctor's lounge, you can hear stories as compelling as those shared in psychotherapy sessions. My life had long settled into a measured, predictable rhythm until 2 months ago when my grandmother Matilda died. She was 87 and, until the very end, remained a woman with a clear mind, a firm voice, and a habit of keeping everything under control. Grandmother taught law, a strict, impeccably precise woman whom students both feared and idolized simultaneously. She dedicated almost 40 years to that profession, building her reputation brick by brick, and earned enough to be dependent on no one. After her death, everything she owned was put in my name. The house, the bank account, the collection of old law books, even a small plot of land outside the city. I hadn't expected anything else. We were very close, especially after my grandfather Robert passed away 3 years ago. Last week I received a letter. The envelope was thick, white with an embossed seal, from a law firm I had never heard of. The subject line read, "Legal Notification, Estate of Matilda Giuliani." I opened the envelope mechanically, thinking it was just another piece of inheritance paperwork, but after the first paragraph, my heart tightened, as if someone were squeezing it from the inside. The letter stated that my parents, Victoria and Michael, were suing me. They were contesting grandmother's will, claiming that I had manipulated an elderly woman who lacked mental capacity. I reread the letter 3 times. I couldn't believe my eyes. Victoria and Michael, my parents, the very people who had abandoned me when I was 2 years old, people I hadn't spoken to in 30 years, people I didn't remember at all, except from old photographs and faded albums. And now, a lawsuit, betrayal cloaked in legal form. To understand how utterly absurd this all was, you needed to know my story. I don't remember my parents. I have no image, no scent, no single scene from a life with them. Victoria never held me in her arms. Michael never read me fairy tales. My childhood began with Matilda and Robert, my grandmother and grandfather. They took me in when I was 2, and from that moment on, I knew only their home, their voices, their love. When I turned 10, I asked grandmother for the first time why I didn't have parents like the other kids. We were sitting at the large wooden kitchen table, which always had a small vase of candied orange slices on it. She was silent for a long time, and then she said, "Your parents were very young when you were born. They weren't ready. They wanted to live, travel, build careers. Your grandfather and I asked them to let you be born. We promised to help. We thought maybe they would grow to love you. But after 2 years, we realized they couldn't. So we formalized the adoption." I didn't cry. Even at 10, I already understood. They weren't there, and they never would be. But I had my grandmother and grandfather, and that was enough. A year later, I learned more than I wanted to know. I couldn't sleep and went down to the kitchen for water. Grandmother's voice came from the room, sharp, hurt. "You have another daughter now, Victoria," she was saying into the phone receiver. "Can't you at least see Gaia sometimes?" A pause. And then, a woman's voice, my mother's. "We love Emma. We want to raise Emma. Gaia was a mistake, a burden. Emma is not. We are ready for her. Stop asking me about Gaia. She has you and Robert." I stood in the hallway, barefoot, clutching a glass. Then I quietly returned to my room and lay down. From that evening on, grandmother never uttered the names Victoria and Michael again, and I never asked again. From then on, my family consisted of 3 people, grandmother, grandfather, and me. They were at every school play, sat in the front row, clapped the loudest. When I was accepted into college, grandfather personally helped me move my suitcases into the dorm, and grandmother gave me an old silver pendant. For luck. They cried when I received my diploma, and they were by my side when I entered medical school. After graduation, I got a job at the clinic and rented my own apartment. But every Sunday, without exception, I went to their house. We had breakfast together, tended to the roses in the garden, and then baked carrot cake with her famous cream cheese frosting. Grandmother said the secret wasn't in the recipe, but in the patience. I tried, and after months, I finally made a cake almost as good as hers. When Grandfather died, everything seemed to turn gray. A heart attack took him suddenly. He didn't live to see the ambulance. Grandmother held up surprisingly well then, but I knew. From that point on, she lived half empty. I started visiting her even more often, helped with the garden, cooked dinner, and in the evenings we watched old films together. Sometimes she would fall asleep right on the sofa, and I would quietly cover her with a blanket, feeling time slipping away from under my feet, like sand between my fingers. 10 years ago, when Grandfather was still alive, they changed their will. I was already working as a doctor then and visited their house less often than before, but I sensed a serious conversation brewing between them. They discussed something in whispers, behind the closed living room door, sometimes stopping when I entered. Grandmother spoke softly, Grandfather stubbornly, but I didn't pay it much mind until one evening he called me to them. They sat side by side, as always, he with his cane, she with a mug of tea, and looked at me as if they were about to say something important. Grandfather spoke first. "We've decided to leave everything to you, Gaia. The house, the savings, everything we have." I didn't understand at first. The words sounded simple, without pomp, but there was something immense in them. Recognition, trust, a love that couldn't be measured. That evening, I cried, not because of the money or the house, but because they had chosen me again. After my biological parents had once refused, my real parents, Matilda and Robert, had chosen me, again and again. Now, 30 years after Victoria and Michael left, they wanted to take away everything that belonged to those who raised me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about memory, about my life, about the quiet of those evenings when Grandmother baked carrot cake and the scent of roses from the garden. The trial was scheduled to begin 3 weeks after I received the letter. I didn't hesitate. I immediately hired a lawyer. Her name was Nicole Rain, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, an impeccable suit, and a cold, analytical gaze. She didn't smile, but there was something reliable in her voice that inspired trust. "They claim you isolated Matilda from her daughter," she said at our first meeting, flipping through papers. "That you manipulated her to get the inheritance." "That's insane," I replied. "They never visited her. They didn't even call." Nicole looked up. "Can you prove that?" "Yes. Grandmother kept diaries for 30 years straight, every day. She wrote everything down." Nicole's eyes flashed with interest. "Do you still have them?" "All of them, in boxes at my house." "Bring them. We'll need them." I spent the next 2 weeks surrounded by those diaries, brown, leather-bound, some with pages already faded. I paged through them at night, underlining dates, making notes, sometimes just sitting with a book on my lap, unable to read further. It was painful, as if I were reliving Grandmother's life, page by page. There were descriptions of my childhood holidays, exams, first dates, and in between, lines about Victoria, about her phone calls, her promises, her perpetual, "I'll definitely come this time." December 20th, 1998. Victoria called, said she would come for Christmas. Gaia is so happy, baked more cookies. December 15th, 2000. Says she'll come again, says she bought presents, told Gaia not to wait, I don't want her to be hurt again. December 20th, 2001. Victoria cried on the phone, said she missed us, promised to come on Christmas Eve. Gaia said she doesn't care anymore. There were hundreds of entries like that. Promises for birthdays, Easter, Thanksgiving, and not one was kept. The diaries were a chronicle of 30 years of empty words. They spoke for all of us. For my silence, for Grandmother's pain, for everything that was never spoken aloud. The day of the trial arrived, a cold October morning. The courtroom smelled of old paper and machine coffee. I entered with Nicole, feeling every step echo in my chest, and for the first time in 30 years, I saw them, Victoria and Michael. They sat at a separate table in expensive suits with expressions of practiced sorrow. Next to them was their lawyer, Jonathan Stevens, with a leather briefcase that seemed to cost half as much as my car. Behind them sat a girl, Emma, my younger sister. She was 21 now. She looked anywhere but at me. The judge was a woman named Davis, around 40, composed, with a cold attentiveness in her eyes. Nicole quietly told me that Judge Davis had once, many years ago, been one of Matilda Giuliani's students. I felt a strange relief, as if grandmother's presence still lingered somewhere nearby. Stevens went first. His voice was perfectly trained, speaking without hesitation, with the confident pathos taught in the best law schools. "Your Honor," he said, "this case concerns an elderly woman whom her granddaughter isolated from her own daughter for personal gain. Mrs. Giuliani was misled, led to believe her daughter didn't care for her. This is manipulation, the result of which is an unjust will." I felt like laughing. Every word of his sounded like a farce, alien and absurd. Nicole stood up, waited for a pause, and spoke calmly. "Your Honor, the reality is much simpler. Matilda Giuliani was a woman of exceptional intellect. She made a conscious and considered decision. She left her estate to the one who was by her side for 30 years, to the one who didn't miss a single Sunday dinner, to the one who stayed when others left. The evidence will show that Victoria and Michael Giuliani abandoned their daughter when she was 2 years old and showed no interest in Matilda's life for 3 decades. They are here for the money, nothing more." Nicole's first piece of evidence was grandmother's diaries, all 30 years, neatly stacked in boxes. She opened one, turned the pages, and began to read aloud. April 15, 2003, called Victoria to remind her about Gaia's piano recital. Said she would try to come. I know she won't. June 8, 2007, Gaia's high school honors graduation is in a week. Called Victoria and Michael. Michael said they would think about it. I'm not holding my breath. Graduation day was clear and warm, as if spring itself had decided to bless that moment. Gaia stood on stage before the graduates, parents, teachers. Confident, straight, mature. Her voice was calm and firm, each word penetrating the hall like a beam of light. She spoke of gratitude, of memory, of the people who stay when others disappear. When the applause died down, I looked around. Victoria and Michael were not there. They didn't come. Only later, among the mail, I found a card with a strange, hasty signature and a $50 bill tucked inside. Their entire involvement in my life fit into that pathetic envelope. In court, Nicole brought out a thick folder, records of grandfather's phone calls over the last 15 years. She marked every call to Victoria and Michael, every attempt to contact them, every reminder that someone was waiting for them somewhere. Dozens of calls, messages about school events, requests to come to a concert, calls during times of illness, when I had pneumonia in college, when I entered medical school, when I graduated. Of all those attempts, only a few received a response, and those conversations lasted no longer than 2 minutes. The rest, silence, emptiness. Then Nicole turned on a screen. Photographs flashed up. My kindergarten graduation, me in a tiny cap between my beaming grandmother and grandfather. A shot from high school, me giving a speech, grandfather in the front row capturing the moment with an old camera. Then, college. Me in a white medical gown, the 3 of us standing together, hugging, tears on our faces. Not from sadness, but from pride. Victoria and Michael were in none of the pictures. Not a single image of them next to me, as if they never existed at all. Then Nicole called witnesses. The first was Mrs. Chan, a neighbor who had lived next door for 25 years. "How often did you see Gaia visiting Matilda?" Nicole asked. "Every Sunday," she replied without hesitation. "In any weather, rain or snow, she always came." "And Victoria?" Nicole clarified. Mrs. Chan slowly turned to my mother. "Never. In all these years, not once." Next was Mr. Patterson from across the street. His words were the same. Then Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down. The same story. They all said the same thing. I came. Victoria did not. Then Nicole called Rosa, our housekeeper. She was in her 60s, but she still stood straight, and warm kindness sparkled in her eyes. She'd been around for so many years that she knew every corner of the house, every smell of the kitchen, every one of grandmother's habits. Nicole asked, "Rosa, after Robert's death 3 years ago, how often did Gaia visit Matilda?" "Every Sunday, without exception." "And Victoria?" "Not once, Signora," Rosa replied quietly, lowering her eyes. "Did Matilda ever express concern that Gaia was isolating her?" "No. She looked forward to those visits like a holiday. They cooked together, baked carrot cake, drank tea in the garden. Those were her happiest days." Jonathan Stevens, Victoria's lawyer, pursed his lips nervously. But soon he stood up and played his surprise card. He called a new witness, Dr. Christopher Wilson. He entered with a confident stride, in a perfectly fitted suit, with a smile calculated to the millimeter. He nodded amiably to the judge, as if they were old acquaintances, and took his seat. "Dr. Wilson, you treated Matilda Giuliani in the last year of her life, correct?" Jonathan began. "What was your assessment of her mental state?" "She exhibited significant cognitive decline," the doctor replied evenly, as if reading from a script. "She was anxious, disoriented, often couldn't even remember the date. In my professional opinion, she was no longer capable of making rational decisions about her estate." My stomach twisted, as if I'd been punched from the inside. This man was lying, without a shadow of a doubt, without shame. Jonathan didn't miss a beat. "Did Matilda ever share any concerns about Gaia with you?" "Yes," Wilson nodded. "She said that Gaia was putting too much pressure on her, that she wanted her money, and insisted that she rewrite the will excluding Victoria." A light whisper ran through the courtroom. It was a brazen lie, but Stevens looked pleased. He leaned back in his chair as if he had already won. Nicole stood up calmly. In her hand was a thin folder, her gaze cold, precise. "Dr. Wilson," she began, "when exactly did you open your practice in San Diego?" "About 8 months ago," he replied, hesitating slightly. "With whom did you open it?" "With Dr. David Thompson." Nicole opened a document, smiled slightly at the corner of her lips. "Dr. David Thompson is Michael Giuliani's cousin, is he not?" For a moment, silence hung in the room. "Yes." Wilson squeezed out, fidgeting slightly in his chair. "Tell me, doctor, how many times did you actually see Matilda Giuliani?" He averted his eyes. "I don't remember exactly. Let me remind you." Nicole flipped through papers. "Only twice. Once in January, the second time in February of this year. Correct?" "Possibly. And both times you prescribed her sedatives for anxiety," she clarified. "At whose request?" The doctor hesitated, his gaze shifting from Nicole to Jonathan, then to Victoria. The answer came almost in a whisper. "Victoria Giuliani asked me to examine her mother." Nicole calmly turned a page in her folder, and the rustle of paper was louder than the voices in the room. She took out another document, carefully, as if producing not just evidence, but the key that was meant to reveal the truth to everyone. For 30 years, Matilda Giuliani's primary care physician was Dr. Paul Johnson, she said, looking directly at the judge. The room seemed to grow cooler. Even the breathing of those present slowed. Nicole continued. "Dr. Johnson attended to her until her death. Dr. Wilson, did you consult with Dr. Johnson before diagnosing cognitive impairment?" Wilson was silent for too long. A shadow of doubt flickered in his gaze. Then he quietly replied, "No." Nicole nodded, as if this answer were expected, known in advance. Dr. Johnson's records show that Matilda's cognitive functions remained sharp until the very end. No anxiety, no dementia, no confusion. She was completely of sound mind. Nicole paused, allowing the words to settle in the air. "So you made your diagnosis based on 2 visits, arranged by a woman who had a direct interest in changing the will?" Wilson turned away, looked at the judge as if seeking salvation in another's face. "I made my assessment based on what I observed personally," he said. "Personally, during 2 meetings arranged by Victoria Giuliani, who wanted to contest her mother's will? Nicole clarified quietly, and her voice held neither anger nor triumph, only clarity. After these words, the silence became almost physical. Even the judge's breath seemed to freeze. Jonathan Stevens, sitting nearby, looked as if he wanted to dissolve into the air. Nicole lowered her gaze to her papers, like a conductor preparing to change the tempo of a symphony, and said, "The next witness is Dr. Paul Johnson." Dr. Johnson entered calmly with the dignity of a man who carried years of experience and confidence in every word. In his hands was a thick folder, and when he placed it on the table, a light rustle of paper was heard in the room again, almost like the breath of memory. "Dr. Johnson, how long were you Matilda Giuliani's primary care physician?" Nicole asked. 32 years, he replied confidently. "And you saw her regularly until her death?" "Yes, every 3 months, and more often if she had any issues. I saw her just 2 weeks before she passed." His voice was firm, requiring no proof. "How would you assess her cognitive state during that period?" Dr. Johnson opened the folder, his gaze softening, as if he were seeing before him again the woman he had spoken with for so many years. Matilda was exceptionally clear-minded. She remembered events from 30 years ago in minute detail. She managed her finances independently, made decisions about her treatment, and I would say, was a strong-willed person. No dementia, no confusion, no signs of cognitive decline. And, in your professional opinion, was she capable of making informed decisions about her estate? "Absolutely," the doctor replied, looking directly at the judge. Matilda knew exactly what she was doing. This time, even Jonathan didn't ask any questions. He lowered his eyes, pretending to flip through his notes, though it was clear to everyone he had nothing more to say. Nicole took a step forward, and her voice sounded again, now slightly quieter, but more distinct. "I call Robert Chen, Mrs. Giuliani's financial advisor." A man in his 50s entered the room, stern, in an impeccable suit, with neat glasses on his nose. He carried a folder and a laptop, and his gait conveyed the dignity of a man accustomed to dealing with facts, not assumptions. "Mr. Chen, how long did you work with Matilda Giuliani?" 20 years, he replied. "Tell me, did she provide financial support to Victoria and Michael Giuliani?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "For the last 20 years, she transferred $1,250 to them monthly. That's about $15,000 a year. Over 2 decades, approximately $300,000. A light murmur went through the room. Someone quietly exhaled. Someone raised their eyebrows. Even the judge looked surprised. Nicole allowed the pause to hang, then asked, "Do you know what that money was used for?" "Yes," Chen replied, flipping through papers. "Matilda told me herself. It was help for raising their younger daughter, Emma. She wanted to be sure the child had everything she needed." Nicole nodded. "Did Gaia ever ask Matilda or Robert for money, aside from what was spent on her medical school education?" "Never. Not once in all my time working with their finances," Chen said. I looked at my parents. Victoria and Michael's faces were pale, tense, as if the air had been sucked out of them. Emma sat beside them, staring at the table. Nicole turned another page. "Did Matilda ever express regret about leaving her estate to Gaia?" "No," Chen replied calmly. "She and Robert discussed it more than once. They both believed Gaia had earned it. She stayed when the others turned away. At that moment, I felt the air in the room grow denser, as if the space were filling with what had previously remained between the lines. Not money, not papers, but loyalty, love, and duty." Nicole closed the folder, paused, and suddenly said, "I call Michael Giuliani." For a second, it seemed he hadn't heard. Then he slowly stood up and walked to the stand. His steps were uneven, as if he were walking on ice. Seated, he avoided looking at me or at his mother. Nicole stepped closer. "Mr. Giuliani, tell me, how many of your daughter's graduation ceremonies did you attend?" He coughed. "I don't quite understand the question." "It's simple," Nicole replied. Kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, medical school. How many? Michael looked away. I don't remember. Let me help. None, she said quietly. You did not attend a single graduation. He was silent. Nicole didn't rush. What did Gaia study in college? Law, I think. Or business. She studied medicine, Nicole corrected gently. She is a cardiologist. Did you know that? He shrugged. Wasn't sure of the details. Have you ever been to her home? No. Do you know her address? No. Can you name even one of her friends? Michael shot a glance at his lawyer, but he just lowered his eyes. No, he squeezed out. Nicole nodded. No further questions. My father returned to his seat, as if he had become smaller, hunched, deflated. Victoria didn't look at him. The judge looked at his watch, then announced, "Recess. Court will resume in 3 weeks for closing arguments." The room slowly stirred. People stood up. Some whispered. Some averted their eyes. And I sat motionless, feeling all of it. 3 decades of life, love, pain, and truth compress into a single silence. I left the courtroom with Nicole and didn't look back at my parents. 2 days later, Victoria called me, and I froze for a second over the phone, not knowing whether to answer. Curiosity won, and I picked up. "Gaia, we need to talk," she said, as if it were a request for a meeting, not a call to battle. "This trial has torn the family apart. We should settle this privately." I listened, feeling an icy rose of distrust bloom in my chest. "There's nothing to settle," I said. "What if we split everything 50-50? Half for you, half for Emma. That's fair, isn't it? You are both Matilda's granddaughters." Her voice was businesslike, her tone expectant, as if asking to buy her conscience with small change. I laughed, quietly, without joy, with a bitterness that spread through my throat. "You want to talk about fairness?" I replied. "You abandoned me. You forgot I existed for 30 years. Now you want half of grandmother's estate. Emma is your daughter, not my sister. You took care of her yourselves." I hung up. After that, a storm of calls and messages began. Victoria called every day, sometimes twice. Michael sent emails, just formal phrases behind a mask of resentment. Even Emma once wrote to me that I was selfish and cruel. The messages ranged from pleas to threats. In one of Michael's emails, I read the line, "You will regret turning your back on family. We will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." In another, from Victoria, "Gaia, I am your mother. Does that mean nothing to you?" I showed all of it to Nicole. She read it with the attention people give to medical charts and calmly stated, "This is harassment." Her voice was even and professional. "Inform them that any further contact may be construed by the court as stalking and intimidation. That might make them back off." When Victoria called again a day later, I was ready. "Victoria, my lawyer considers your calls and messages harassment. If you don't stop, the court will hear about it." There was a break on the line. Then, hurried, irritated tones. "Are you threatening me? I am your own mother." I felt disgusted. "You are not my mother. Matilda was my mother, and you are harassing me for money that doesn't belong to you. How can you be so cold?" Her voice pierced the line with complaint and pretense, but it didn't make her any closer to me. I hung up, and after that, the contact stopped. 3 weeks passed. I went to work, saw patients, tried to stay in my daily routine, in the fragile world of EKG strips and confident diagnoses. But the trial lived somewhere deep inside, unraveling my memory and piecing it back together. Finally, the day of closing arguments arrived. I sat next to Nicole and watched as Jonathan Stevens stood up. His speech was full of pathos and words about family duty, about the rights of biological parents, and about how I had supposedly stolen what rightfully belonged to Victoria and Michael. It all sounded like a broken record stuck in one place. Nothing in those words touched what was true. Not the smell of grandmother's kitchen, nor the evenings with cake, nor those Sundays that made up my life. Then Nicole stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "I would like to read something." She pulled out a sheet of paper, and the air in the room suddenly grew thicker, like before a storm. It was a letter from Matilda, written 2 weeks before her death and given to her financial advisor with a request to use it if the will was contested. Nicole began to read. "I am leaving everything to Gaia not because she is my granddaughter, but because she stayed. When my daughter abandoned her child, Gaia could have become resentful. She could have withdrawn and become bitter. Instead, she became the light of our lives. She never missed a Sunday dinner. Not in 30 years. She held my hand when Robert died. She made sure I was never alone. Victoria left me decades ago. She remembers me only when she needs money. Gaia earned this inheritance through love and devotion. This is my choice made with sound mind and a full heart. Matilda Giuliani." After Nicole finished reading, a silence fell in the room, as if someone had suddenly turned off all the sound. I saw Victoria wiping her eyes, but I felt no pity. Those weren't real tears, but the tears of a loser who knows their time has passed. Judge Davis slowly looked around the room, and one could tell she didn't need long deliberation. Her face spoke clearly. Then she spoke quietly, confidently, and her words carried gratitude. 15 years ago, I was fortunate to study under Matilda Giuliani. She was one of the most insightful lawyers I have ever encountered. She taught me to pay attention to evidence, not emotions. So let's examine the evidence. The judge said this as if she were about to sort out my entire life and the lives of those who once called themselves my family. And she indeed took a stack of papers, vast and heavy with years, with entries with ink that held more truth than 1,000 conversations. 30 years of diaries neatly bound with thought and care. Pages wrought with suffering, where every date was a tiny beacon of memory, marking hopes that were lit and so often extinguished, because promises never came to the house and never sat at our table. The phone records were shown, thin mechanical testimonies of a voice trying to reach another voice and meeting emptiness. Missed calls, short replies, messages that didn't lead to meetings, photographs where I stood in a gown and cap, in smiles and tears of happiness, and where, by ideological and biological laws, 2 people should have been, there was a gaping void. Financial reports laid out the dry arithmetic of care turned into numbers, $300,000, a sum under which not a single hour, not a single conversation, not a single personal visit was recorded. And finally, that sheet of paper, the letter, written in the hand of a woman who retained a clear mind until her last days, a letter where the reasons were stated plainly, not greed, not cunning, not a shadow on kinship, but love and gratitude to the one who stayed, all of it lined up before the courtroom in a row that could neither be rejected nor ignored. Judge Davis, weighing every phrase, looked at my parents with that calm severity given by years of studying law and life, and spoke words that sounded to me like liberation and confirmation. Matilda Giuliani knew exactly what she was doing. She left her estate to the person who earned it through decades of love and devotion. This lawsuit has no grounds. The gavel struck the table, and the sound impulse rolled through the room like the official closing of someone's attempt to rewrite the truth. It was all over. Victoria, Michael, and Emma stood up silently, gathered their things, and left without granting me a glance, and I watched them go. But inside, I felt no burning revenge, no searing regret. There was a calm stillness, like after a long storm when the sky finally clears and you can breathe deeper. Nicole put a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was brief and warm, like a mark of work completed, and we left the courthouse together. The sun was shining outside, and it seemed not just like a good weather scene, but a symbol of a new beginning, because the decision rendered that day not only affirmed Matilda's last will, but gave me the right to live on as chosen for me by those who raised me. A year has passed since then. I am 33. I was promoted to deputy director of the clinic last month. a big responsibility, sleepless nights, and new decisions to make. But I love this work, and it gives me a field for my perseverance and compassion. I handle the duties well, and these successes don't replace for me the evenings in the house that is now mine, but was hers. Yet where her soul remains in the furniture, the books, and the rose garden. I haven't given up Sunday dinners. I've kept that tradition, but changed its meaning. If before the table seated few, now I invite colleagues, friends, neighbors, those who have become my family by choice and by deed. Last Sunday, there were 12 people at my table. We ate roast chicken and vegetables, laughed and shared news, and then Rosa brought out the carrot cake. The same Rosa who refused to retire and still comes on Saturdays to bake, using Matilda's recipe. She's 67 now and still carefully whips the frosting and sprinkles the crust with cinnamon. And the cake turns out perfect because I spent months learning and repeating those movements grandmother once showed me. On weekdays, I live in my city apartment, but on weekends, I stay in the house. It's mine now, and it still feels like I'm living inside her memories. The furniture is the same, the photographs are the same, and the rose garden still explodes with color every summer, as if nature disagrees with any legal disputes and preserves what truly matters. Every month I visit the graves of my grandmother and grandfather, bring fresh roses, the very ones I planted under her guidance, and tell them about my life, my work, the Sunday dinners. I tell them I am happy, and this admission, spoken aloud, becomes for me a pledge that memory is not a burden, but a legacy to be cherished and multiplied. Last week was my birthday. I am 33 and neither Victoria nor Michael called, which I didn't expect. I stopped waiting for their footsteps many years ago. Instead, I received calls from friends, a warm party at work, and a bouquet from Rosa, on whose card it said, "Happy birthday, my dearest person." I don't know what my biological parents are doing now, whether they live together, think of me, strive for change. That knowledge is no longer important. They were not my family when I needed love, and therefore, they will never be so in essence. Emma once, about 6 months after the trial, sent me an angry message saying I had destroyed her family, that I was selfish, but I blocked her and didn't reply. She is a stranger to me, and our shared DNA doesn't create automatic closeness. She grew up with those I never had and received the love I was denied, and I bear her no hatred, but prefer to maintain a peace free from claims stemming from money and ambition. The trial taught me that real family isn't just blood, but actions. Those who come and those who stay, those who hold your hands in hours of grief and laugh with you on Sundays. They are the ones who write your destiny in the most reliable lines. I inherited the house and the money, but more importantly, I inherited the lesson. Family is a choice, not just a biological accident. And now, when I stand at the stove, serve plates to friends, treat patients, and plant roses in the garden, I know that everything that truly matters remains what we do for others and who chooses to stay by our side.